Hello YouTubers, and welcome back to Go Figure Customs YouTube page. It's time once again for another tutorial. I've had a request off of my Instagram page, and that request is on how to paint eyes. Painting eyes is probably one of my least favorite things to do because it's one of my... It's not an easy thing to do, and it's not an easy thing to get to look good. That being said, it's not impossible, and I'm going to talk about how to do that as part of a larger tutorial on how I paint heads. I was going to say this is going to be a tutorial on how to paint heads, but there are so many different ways to do it. There's no right way, there's no wrong way, so it's how I do it. And the head that we're going to paint today is Liam Neeson from Batman Begins. I've done a custom of him already. I did him the head on a suited figure for Ra's al Ghul, and now I'm going to do another Ra's al Ghul figure with him in the ninja gear. So obviously I have primered this first. I have a ton of videos on different painting techniques and primers and paints and brushes on this YouTube channel. Be sure and check those out because I'm going to skip a lot of the explanations on those kind of things for this video. Otherwise, it's just one rabbit hole after another, and this video becomes extremely long and nobody watches it, nobody gets anything from it. So, figures primered. The first thing I'm going to do is paint a base coat of a light pink. I use Army Painter's War Paint Fey Pink, and I am going to do this with an airbrush. You can do this with a regular brush with thin coats, but oh boy, I guess I need some more of this here pretty soon. Do I have some more? Oh, boys. Yeesh. All right, well. Looks like we'll be going and getting paint. Got paint today, and it looks like we're going to go get paint tomorrow. This is... the main reason I use an airbrush, thin, light coats, and it's quick. So what we're going to do, I'm also going to do his hands while I have some paint in the airbrush. There we go. It's kind of hard to see. We'll do a close-up of that here in a second. Of course, I've got to clean my airbrush first, so we're going to do that real quick. All right, that's a pretty decent coat. Like I said, it's I like it for the speed and the light, thin coats. Often just the Fey Pink sprayed on there does a really nice job of getting a reasonable skin tone. But that's only the first step, so let's do the second step. And that second step is going to be airbrushing again on some Barbarian Flesh, also from War Paints. That bottle's empty, and I have a new bottle here. And I'm gonna do just a very light coat over that pink. Not gonna do very much I like how that Fey Pink is almost enough on its own for a reasonable skin tone. It doesn't really come across on the video very well, but in person, it looks really nice. Basically what I'm doing with the flesh tone is warming it up a little bit, I think is probably the best way to put it. But just a couple of sprays real quick and that's good. All right, so got to clean that airbrush out, so hang on a sec. All right, there he is with the flesh tone airbrushed on. Again, I know the airbrush can seem daunting, but the same results can be obtained by doing thin, light coats with a paintbrush and thinned out paint. Just not as smoothly, I think, and certainly not as quickly. But there's very little skill involved in this. I know the airbrush, there is definitely a large startup cost to it and maintenance cost as well, but I think it's worth it. Because this just took me a total of about 5 minutes to do what would have taken probably a couple hours by hand. We're not quite ready to start painting the eyes just yet. The next step is doing a bit of a wash on the face to add some color to it, to some tint. I'm going to put just a couple of drops of Army Painter Quick Shade, which is their brand of wash. I'm using the red tone for that, and I'm going to thin that out a bit. The brush I'm going to use, I just bought today. Again, Army Painter. I use Army Painter because it's convenient to get. It's not super expensive stuff, and it's high quality. So a little bit of both. And I put the drop on my wet palette, which is a sponge with a wet piece of parchment paper on it. Okay, switch to my painting glasses here. And I'm gonna thin that out on the wet palette. And we're just gonna dab it on there and spread it around a little bit. That's a bit much. It's a bit much on the forehead, so I'm going to thin it out with a little bit of water. There we go. I could airbrush the hair first and it would probably look better, but painting the hair by hand is still one of the things that I prefer to, that's how I still prefer to do that, is to paint the hair by hand instead of airbrushing it. I would want to airbrush it first because the hair is going to be a solid color, whereas the skin tone is two different colors, so it's really hard to touch up overspray from an airbrush on two different colors. All right, there we go. Let's have a look at that. And then I'm going to let that sit for a few minutes. We're going to let that dry. But through the magic of editing, you'll only have to wait a second or two. The next step we're going to do is another wash on the face. Shut up, Siri. And we are going to use Army Painters again, Flesh Wash. Again, we're going to put this on the wet palette. There is a video tutorial on how to make a wet palette, but again, it's a kitchen sponge with a piece of wet parchment paper. Super easy. Looks like it's not quite dry, but that's all right. So I'm going to thin out Flesh Wash as well with some water. And then mostly I'm just going to do around the eyes and the nose and just some creases here. I'm pretty sparing with the Flesh Wash. A little goes a really long way with this stuff. It's real easy to get carried away with this stuff. And again, through the magic of editing, we're gonna let this dry. And if I didn't want to wait a really long time for this to dry, I would just hit it with my airbrush on the high temperature, but the low pressure, I guess, the lower setting, to get it to dry a little quicker without pushing the wash around. Actually, you know what? We're gonna let the wash on the face dry while we paint the hair. So let's pick the paint. Okay, for the hair, before we do that, painting references, I highly recommend doing a little research on what you're going to, who you're going to paint. If you're going to do, like, this is obviously an existing person from an existing movie, and I want to get it as close to screen accurate as I can. So Google Image is your friend. I just Googled Liam Neeson, Batman Begins, and then looked at all the different pictures. His hair in the movie is dark brown, kind of medium to dark brown, with kind of almost blonde highlights on the side and on his mustache. So what I'm using right now is oak brown. Again, war paints. I'm using the airbrush one because I like thinner paints. The brush I'm using right now is Insane Detail. I don't know that I mentioned the brush name, particular size. I don't know what those correlate to size-wise, because brushes do have, are sized. So I don't know what that correlates to. Again, I could have airbrushed the hair first, and it probably would look better, but it's still one of those things that I like to paint by hand. Paint-wise, I would prefer to use Tamiya. There's a Tamiya color for dark brown for hair that I really like, but I am at the end of the bottle of the one I have, and I can't get Tamiya paint anymore. The hobby store that I bought Tamiya paint from closed, and the nearest one that carries Tamiya paint is quite a ways away, clear across town, which wouldn't be the end of the world,
because I could run, once or twice a month for the paint that I want. But last time I was down there, their selection of Tamiya paint was horrible, and it was not worth the time or the gas to drive down to the store. Let's see here. So again, thin coats. I really like the airbrush paint for the thin coats. There's no thinner needed. Don't really even need to water them down. I do keep it on the wet palette to keep it from drying out while I use it. So it's kind of hard to talk and do the really fine detail. So let me get these little bits here. Okay. All right. Oh, no, that's the spot there. Okay. All right, I'm also going to do this mustache with this brown real quick, and then I can go back and just paint the highlights over it. I need better lighting in here for this kind of thing, and that is the goal for this year. The goal for last year was to get my loose action figure display up, and I got that taken care of. So the goal for this year is to get my customizing room more of a like functional studio. Had some of the paint run there. So I'm just gonna thin it out with some water and then brush it out. But lighting for this studio is going to be probably next month is what I'm gonna aim for. Okay, the airbrush paint might have been a little thin for the mustache because it kind of ran off on the right upper part of the mustache. So I'm going to use Games Workshop paint and touch it up, something that's a little thicker. And for that, I'm going to use Rhinox Hide. Kind of hard to see the name on that, but that's what we're going to use. Because it is a dark brown as well. So I'm going to get just a dab on my brush, put it on the wet palette, and thin it out just a bit. Not enough to make it runny, but enough to give me a nice smooth coat. I'm going to put some of the, just dab some of it along in his hair so there's the same color, and then just kind of rub it in with my finger. So the hair is the same color as mustache. Probably doesn't need to be touched up because we're gonna do the light on that side, but there we go. All right, it's a little darker than I want it, but that's all right because we're gonna do the highlights with a different shade anyway. Now we're gonna do the kind of the highlights along the sides of his hair on his head and then his mustache too. I've got a picture of him pulled up on my computer so I can see where the highlights start and where they end. I am going to use Citadel paint again, Ushabti Bone. It's probably a shade lighter than what I would like to use, but that's okay because what I'm going to do is hit it with a wash afterwards to help blend it. So having it a shade lighter, when I do the wash, it will actually be the shade that I want. Again, thinning it out with just a bit of water. And it's not quite completely covering. There's a little bleed through of the color underneath, but that's okay because there should be some, because it would be darker in some areas and lighter in some areas. Now we're gonna kind of go back over the mustache and beard and add those lighter highlights. Woof. That's pretty light, actually. Might be a little thicker than I want. We're gonna blend the sides now and kind of smooth out that mustache with a wash. One of the things I was gonna mention that I forgot earlier was clearly I'm painting the head on the figure that I'm going to use for this custom. But I haven't started working on the rest of the figure yet. Normally the head's one of the last things that I do, but for this tutorial I wanted to do the head first. What you can do if you're just going to do the head is get some tweezers. So this head is going to be Garth Knight from Knight Rider. So you can see, start working on that. I just don't have the figure that I want to use for that yet. And this is Lee Majors from The Fall Guy. Just got the base coats on those, but I'm using just some tweezers. Are really useful things to have in your customizing workshop for that particular thing. All right, so we're gonna blend the hair and Army Painter Quick Shade Mid Brown is what I'm gonna use for the wash on that. Depending, all washes are pretty good. Some dry flat or matte, some dry glossy. That's one of the reasons I stopped using, not stopped using, but switched more towards the Army Painter instead of the Citadel, which I've used for years and years and years, because they changed their formula and it went from a matte when dry to a glossy when dry. That's not such a big deal to me. I just don't like inconsistency, but how I fix that is with sealant. because they do make some colors in their shades, in their washes, that aren't in other brands, so I still use Citadel. So for that, I use a sealant to get an even coat. Again, that's something that's going to be in other videos. All right, we're going to thin out that wash a little bit, and then we're just going to apply it. Just dab it on. Actually, it doesn't really even need to be thinned out, honestly. The goal here is just to get all that to blend in nicely. Okay, while that is drying, I'm going to do the eyebrows real quick. And I'm going to use the color that I used for the highlights, and that's the Ushabti Brown. Or the Ushabti Bone, sorry. Actually, I'm going to look and make sure that's the right color I want to use first. I don't think that is actually the color that I want to use. Normally I have my computer pulled up, but I forgot I have the carded figure, my first version of him here, with a nice reference photo on the back. So I'm going to set that just off the camera so I can use that as a paint reference. But I'm going to go with a slightly darker brown than the Ushabti Bone for his eyebrows, and Tolaran Sand from Citadel Games Workshop is what I'm going to use on that. Again, we're going to get a dab on the brush, put it on the wet palette, dab of water in there just to thin it out. And then just paint along the ridge where his eyebrow is. He has very thin eyebrows, so I just need kind of like the hint of color there for it to be realistic. I don't have to have them real pronounced. Okay. All right. Also, while that flesh is drying, or the wash on the hair and the mustache, we're gonna do what the original video was for, and that's the eyes. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna put a dab of white in the eyes and then paint the eyes themselves. For the white, I'm going to use the non-airbrush matte white from War Paints. The airbrush paint is too thin for this sort of thing. But this is too thick, so we have to thin this out a little bit. So another drop on the wet palette, and I'm going to switch brushes to a new brush that I got today. But this is the one that I always use for eyes, and it's the Army Paint War Gamer. The name of the brush is called the Psycho. I like that. All right, so the water on my palette has a brown tinge to it that I don't want, so we're gonna thin it out with some other water. Okay, just enough on the brush, and then got just a little bit too much on there, I think. I think that's probably a little too much. And we're just gonna paint the white part of the eye on both sides. Like so. And then we're going to let that sit for a minute. Now we're going to do the irises, or the colored part of the eyes. His eyes are blue. I'm going to use Games Workshop Cantor Blue. I'm going to use the base color because it's a thicker paint and I want to be able to control it and not have it run. Maybe. Let's dry it out. Again, we'll get just a bit on the brush. Put it on the wet palette. Drop of water, thin it out. And then just enough on the brush to load it. Okay. I'm going to try and make a small half oval where his eyes are. On both sides. All right. Okay. Now, looking at that really close up, it's really rough. It doesn't look fantastic. There's people that do this 100 times better than I do. But there's a thing in photography called viewing distance. That's when you print your picture out that you've taken and hang it on the wall, and you stand a certain distance away from it so everything is at the appropriate focus that it should be. If you get too close to it, you're going to see that some things appear out of focus because you're standing too close to it. Viewing distance also works well for your customs because you're going to hold it about maybe half an arm's length away to really kind of look at the detail of that. Even maybe just a little bit closer than that, and it still looks really good. Now, when I take pictures of my customs, I'm using a macro lens, and I'm enlarging. The lens makes that figure about 4 times normal size. So when you look at those pictures on Facebook, those pictures are about 4 times the size of the figure in person. So you really see those flaws and those details in there. It's kind of hard to tell. All right, and just looking at some areas there, might want to touch up a little bit of, lighten that up just a tad right along in there. So we have the iris is painted. I don't have a steady enough hand to put pupils in there, which would be the black parts of the eyes, or a brush small enough to do that either. The last step that I'm going to do on this particular head is paint the lips a different color. And for that, I like Citadel Color Emperor's Children. I think that's an interesting name for a paint, but there we go. Again, just a dab on the paintbrush, put it on the wet palette, thin it out just a bit, and then I am going to do just a little bit of pink along the lip. Okay, and that's it. The wash did dry kind of glossy, so it looks different than the rest of the figure, or the rest of the head, which is, again, not a problem because I'm going to hit it with sealant before I'm done, and it will be fine. So the question then is, am I going to airbrush the rest of the figure? Yes, I am. What I'll do is I'll take the head off, and I will probably heat up the arms with the hairdryer and pull his hands off, so I don't ruin the paint on the hands. because when I do the head, anytime I'm going to do skin on a figure, I do it all at once to get the same consistency, because it's really hard to replicate results with washes. So what I will do is just pull the hands and head off and then airbrush the base coats on the figure, and then dry brushing and washes, and then put it all back together and then spray seal it, which through the magic of editing you'll see here in a few seconds. Through the magic of editing, here's the completed figure. And you can see this is post sealant, so I've sealed it with the sealant I use, and you can see how it really smooths out all of the between the shiny washes and the matte paint, and just kind of blends everything together really well. But there's the completed figure. All right, so there you go. That is painting heads from start to finish, and like I said, that is how I paint heads, and it's not the right way, it's not the wrong way, it's how I paint heads. And I was going to clarify that even more by saying that's how I paint heads right now. This particular workflow I have been using for just about 2 years now, which is not a very long time considering how long I've been customizing. And this is probably not how I will paint heads 5 years from now. I'm always looking for new ways to expand my techniques and learn more about what I'm doing. So how I paint heads 5 years from now is going to be different from how I paint heads right now. But this is how I do it right now, and I get results that I'm happy with. And in the end, that's the important thing, is that you are happy with your results. I'm going to drop some pictures in here real quick of the close-ups of the figure. And as always, please do that fun social media stuff. Like, share, subscribe, comment below with any questions. I'm always looking for suggestions for other tutorials. So throw those in there. And as always, thanks for watching.